welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. The youth is the most significant yet most vulnerable layer of the Earth's population. And ladies and gentlemen around the world face quite a number of problems. To outline them and to talk about the ways to solve these problems, we're joined in the studio today by Caspar Peek. He's the director of United Nations Population Fund in Ukraine. Hello and thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
So overall, how would you evaluate the situation the youth in Ukraine are in right now?
Well, I think we should start with some good news first.
Okay.
I think the first thing is what we're seeing is that often we talk about young people and we only list the problems, right? I mean, HIV, drinking, drugs, smoking, what have you.
Yeah, this is basically the main information that usually appears in the media.
Actually, what we're seeing right now is that there's a decrease.
That's
there
good
are
news.
fewer, yes, in the younger generations there are fewer people with HIV infections. Young people tend to smoke much less than older people. They drink less as well, in spite of what we think often. And also the very interesting is that we're seeing is that young people are extremely worried about democratic values. They embrace democratic values. They embrace civil rights. They embrace human rights much more probably than the older generations. So they truly are a new generation of hope for Ukraine. Embracing, if you want to call it, European values or universal values, and saying, look, we want to be part of this modern world. We want our country, the world, to be like this. They care about the environment. They care about solidarity among generations, for example. So these are all very, very hopeful signs that we see coming out of research and data and what have you.
Could you say that these optimistic signs are the result of a large-scale educational campaign?
Well, this is a bit where the bad news comes in, I think.
Okay.
I think, a lot of the good news is related to access of young people to information.
To internet, right?
Totally
because
internet.
the older generation never had the access to internet and they did not have information. The younger generation certainly does have this luxury of information
and we're
online.
seeing that they're using that critical thinking to really sift through information and make up their own minds, which is key for any democratic society, of course. Now, the bad news is a little bit, I think, that we're also seeing, for example, less interest of young people in politics. So with every election you've had in Ukraine since 2006, I think, you see the number or the percentage of young people who are going to vote going down. Actually, now it's much less than half.
Is that because they don't trust the politicians anymore?
Well, that's, I think that's a general tendency in the country, and not only in Ukraine, that people tend to trust politicians less.
And even older people, not only the youth.
But you're seeing is in the presidential elections, the last ones here, 44% of young people voted, and in the parliamentary elections the same year was 34%. So you see 1 out of 3 young people vote. That means a lot of young people are basically saying, we're not interested. They're interested in politics, they're interested in anti-corruption drives, they're interested in democratic value and development and all these things, but they're actually saying the political system as it is now, we're not too interested. So that is also a threat to society, of course.
Okay. Well, anything else, the youth is not interested when it should be interested in it.
Well, I think they're interested, if you look a bit at what the concerns
you just said that the young people of Ukraine are interested in anti-corruption initiatives. So does that mean that they do want to change the country? They do want to make it a better place to live. They do want to perceive the European values, but they just don't want to get into the political side of it?
Well, they want to get in. I think there is a disconnect between what they want and what is being offered by society. I think we need to look at this. I mean, it's a similar thing with employment, for example. I mean, young people are well employed, but what they learn in school doesn't necessarily connect to what employers need. So
I would agree to that.
So we're looking at, for example, why is that so? There is a desire for everyone to have a good job. That's very high on the list of the things young people want. But then what you're seeing is that the job market is not there for so many lawyers. Many people
or economists.
Or economists.
Yeah.
There is actually a huge job market for, let's say, people who are technicians. So vocational schools are important, but vocational schools are not seen as attractive by young people. It's low status, blue collar, etc. Even though actually your income might be much higher than that of, well, an underemployed lawyer or whatever. So that is not something that's hitting home. Young people have aspirations there, but the school system doesn't connect. And that's perhaps because the private sector is not involved really in how the schools prepare young people. So that's one thing. So what we're doing, for example, we are now, we've set up a joint program with the Ministry of Youth and Sports, which is the Pact for Youth, where we actually start helping them to create new jobs for young people.
How?
Apprenticeships, internships. So there are now already 5,000 internships started and new jobs. So it's
this year?
Yes, since we started last year, basically.
Okay.
So it's actually helping to create those jobs. A worrisome trend that I see is when I meet with a group of young people and I ask, how many of you want to leave the country? About half raise their hands. That's a problem for Ukraine.
It is a problem, I agree.
You do not want your young people, your most talented, the future generation to leave Ukraine.
So we basically are facing the brain drain.
Very much so. And I
Can
think
we stop that somehow?
Yes, it's a good question.
How can we make Ukraine attractive for young Ukrainians?
This is the main question. You have to make it attractive. So it is by creating jobs. It is by making sure that when you leave school, you're actually employable. You know, what is it that the schools are not teaching? Critical thinking, teamwork, all the kind of skills that the employers of the future and of now are asking for. They're not necessarily what young people are being trained on, right? It's not necessarily critical thinking they're being trained. Yes, you learn about mathematics, you learn about geography, you learn English, etc. But you need to learn other stuff as well. And that is an issue. Now, the other thing is also ask how we keep young people in their towns and villages. Because there tends to be a trend for young people to leave, go to the larger city.
And go to the larger city. Try to move to the capital or any other city with a million population. And this tends to be a real problem because the towns that those young people actually come from are basically left with old population, not able to work properly.
Exactly. So what we're doing now at the UN Population Fund, we're starting actually this year with something we call the Youth Wellbeing Index, which is actually saying, look, this is where currently local governments are putting their money and their efforts to make it interesting for their citizens. Now, how does that resonate with young people? So let's hear from young people. So we build the index. How are you feeling about your health, your well-being, your education? How safe do you feel, especially young women and girls? How safe do they feel in their cities?
Also?
I mean, economic opportunities. And let's compare those data with where local governments are actually putting their money. And then let's sit around. So we build the index to see how does it match reality and what young people see for themselves. And then see where you make changes in the budgets, in the programs you set up. And then you do this.
So what's the index?
That's the index. And then compare this with other cities. Compare it from one year to the other. And then bring more cities into this to actually see what is working. How do young people say, look, I'm happy in this city. I'm going to stay. I'm going to build my life here, my family, a job, whatever. That's what you want. So that's what we're building right now. So we hope over the next few years to get more cities into this. We're starting this year with 3 cities.
Which are?
Lviv, Kherson, and Kremenchuk.
Kremenchuk.
So a bit of a mix in the country. And different conditions, larger, smaller, etc., to see, well, how does this index work? And next year we will start rolling this out. So I know that local government and the Ministry, for example, of Youth and Sports is extremely interested in doing this.
What about Donbass? Are you conducting any information on Donbass?
Donbass is, look, we know there is an issue with young people also having left Donbass area more than any other people probably, because they are more mobile. You know, they don't have houses, so why should you stay, right? And they're looking for jobs anyway. That is an issue. We know that young people are very concerned about the future of that part of the country as well.
How do we make them sure that Ukraine is a stable society?
You know, democracy is a slippery concept, as we're seeing.
It is.
It is really carried by citizens. What I see with young people is they have that desire, but it must be possible. The number one complaint young people have is corruption. The systems are not helping me. There are other systems that help people, but they're not the systems that we work with. So that is a key element. I think the key to all this is really local development. Young people and other people, all people, I think, are connected to their local communities. That's where your home is built. That's where your job is, where your communities are. So making it possible for local communities to be much more friendly to young people, also in Donbass. That's important. I see this, for example, in Mariupol. Mariupol is a vibrant city.
Yes, it is.
A very, very vibrant team, a very active, dynamic mayor and team of local governing team. They're making it possible. They're attracting young people. They're invigorating their economy. That's the kind of model I think we need in Donbass.
And in probably a lot of towns around Ukraine as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Not necessarily swamped by the war.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, so which are, I mean, if that's the question for you, which are the professions that are going to be really popular among the youngsters of Ukraine in the nearest future, let's say 10, 20 years? Is there going to be a shift, like you've mentioned, from lawyers and economists to some people, I don't know, working with the land, for example?
I mean, okay, agriculture, unfortunately, has not made many people rich in the world, unless you have huge extensions of land. But
Or wineries.
Oh, wineries, that's a good point. I mean, there are, of course, the niche areas that really are interesting and lucrative. You know, what I see is, and there's a whole discussion on the future of work, basically. What we're seeing right now in Ukraine is that the income of young people who have actually started their own small businesses is higher than those who are in paid employments. That's what we're seeing now. That's at least for first jobs.
Yeah.
And that is an indication of where income is, because it's not necessarily from jobs. Now, I realize that not everyone can become an entrepreneur, but young people also have tremendous potential for starting there, even if it's a one-person company. It's really about income. We are conditioned to think about jobs, but what people really need is money to live. So can they find money in different ways? Can you start your own company? And how does the government or how does the private sector make that possible? Right now, it's difficult if you're young people to get a loan from the bank to start a company. It's very difficult.
Yes.
It's difficult in many countries, but it's difficult in Ukraine given the scarcity of credit.
I agree.
So that is an important factor. The support services given to young people who say, look, I got a great idea. I can write that up. I need a little bit of money to start this. Who's going to help me? Private sector, banks, government, with support services, technical support, etc. That is a huge sector that is actually providing a lot of income for young people in many other parts of the world right now. That is one thing. I cannot really foresee which professions are going to pay off. I mean, if I knew that, then I probably would get a Nobel Prize for it.
Yeah.
But I can't do that. We see trends. I think what is important is that we need to get rid of the stigma attached to what we call blue-collar jobs.
Exactly, because everybody wants to be on a high-paid job, be like a judge, right?
Yes.
Or a banker,
Yes.
or something else. We need to make other professions more attractive.
Exactly. That is a key thing. I mean, I can see this in many parts of the world where, you know, I mean, to call in a plumber or anyone to fix anything in your house is an expensive undertaking, which means they get good income.
Like to change the locks.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And so it might cost almost as much as going to see a doctor. So in terms of income, there is not necessarily a lot of difference. It's about status. And so that is a whole different process of getting people to think differently. So as long as parents push all their children into, you know, become a lawyer, an engineer, whatever, then we're going to have that problem, the disconnect. The labor market isn't there. Look, for example, there is, I'm not sure about the number, but it's definitely more than 500,000 young people who are working in Poland right now from Ukraine.
Yeah.
What are they doing? They're not engineers. They're not lawyers.
Basically, they're waitresses and construction workers.
All kinds of things, but they're also plumbers and electricians and what have you. So it's not that they're not educated to do this. It's just that they get paid more in those countries than they get paid here. So there is still a problem of money.
Of income.
Who can pay for this? Who can afford it?
And the perception of the society.
Very much. Very much.
Well, hopefully that's going to change anytime soon. Thank you so much for coming here and sharing your point of view. We had a wonderful discussion. That was Caspar Peek. He's the director of United Nations Population Fund. Thank you so much for watching and goodbye.